Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is James Delingpole. James, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Alex. I'm slightly nervous. I'm thinking of all the kind of really famous people you've had on your podcast, and I'm just kind. I mean, your listeners are going to be going, "Who? What? James Delingpole? Never heard of him."
Well, all right then. Well, let's. Your CV is quite interesting, James. It's kind of hard to pigeonhole you. So maybe how would you describe yourself or what you do?
Do you know? I'm really glad you asked me to explain it because what I find is that people tend to um, regurgitate a biography that's from sort of 10 years ago, and I was a completely different person then. So I used to be a really quite successful mainstream media journalist. So I wrote for the Mail, and the Telegraph, and the Times, and I had various jobs. I mean, I was briefly men's fashion writer for the Times. I did film reviews. I did rock. I was a rock critic for a very long time, and I know you share my enthusiasm there. Um, and I was a columnist, and then round about COVID, I saw the light. And two things happened to me pretty much simultaneously. One is that I came to realize that the mainstream media, where I'd spent my whole life, is in fact a lie machine. It just puts out propaganda for the ruling elites. Um, and it lied to us about COVID. It lies to us about everything. And I suddenly felt ashamed to have been in this industry, which unbeknownst to me, was was deceiving the very people it was supposed to serve. You know, the readers, the listeners, the viewers. About the same time, I transformed from a cultural Christian into what I would call a proper Christian. I mean, I was confirmed at school. I went to church at Christmas, and when my children were younger, I used to take them to church. But still, I wasn't, I hadn't gone the final leg of the journey, and now I guess I have.
That's really interesting, James. I didn't come to faith till I'm in my 50s now. I didn't come to faith until I was in my 40s. And I distinctly remember the parish priest saying, to kind of be a Christian, you've got to be prepared to give your life fully to Christ. And I remember thinking, oh, that sounds all right, but I'm not quite sure I was quite prepared to do that at the time. Obviously, as the years have gone by, I've done that and become a vicar. What about yourself? What was the obstacle, James, that was stopping you kind of going the full journey?
Um, I think I don't like to blame it all on the church, but at the same time, I think you might agree with me that culturally, it's very hard to be a Christian because everything in our culture tries to persuade us that belief in the supernatural is a kind of medieval superstition that we all grew out of in the Enlightenment when we realized that science is where it's at, and all these great Enlightenment thinkers took us out into the world of the rational, which is the world we inhabit today. This is the line that's sold to us, and you saw this was going on in by the mid 19th century. This was well advanced when Matthew Arnold wrote Dover Beach, and wrote about the melancholy long withdrawing roar of the sea of faith. He recognized that that we were once a Christian country, and this faith was being replaced by something else. Um, and I think that the church itself has participated in this decline. I think that I'm sure you're an exception, but too many clergymen believe in things like the religion of Gaia and not in the religion of the Bible. They see being a Christian is about sort of doing social work, and sort of feel good things about. And I'm not saying that one shouldn't care about the poor. I'm not saying that isn't a part of it, doing the right thing. But at the core of Christianity is or should be a belief in the risen Christ, and it's not some kind of metaphor or anything like that. This actually happened. And if you don't believe that, and if you don't believe that God created us, and this is another problem I have, Christians who believe in Darwin's evolutionary theory, if you don't believe in the God of the Bible, then you're not really doing it right.
Okay, so with so how does that play into your thinking? So as you were talking, I was interested. Is that I am a parish priest that's heavily involved in areas of social deprivation, and
Yeah,
and sometimes I do sometimes think of myself. I don't say glorified social worker because I
yeah.
don't think that would be appropriate, but yeah, the circumstance of the ministry where I am. And I agree with what you said about the resurrected Christ. What about the literal understanding of Scripture then? Are you a literalist, James, or are you slightly more liberal? Where
I
do you sit?
wouldn't really like labels because I'm still on a journey of understanding. And I think one of the things I've really enjoyed about Christianity is delving into scripture and getting to understand it better and asking lots of questions and having some of them answered and having some of them remain a great puzzle to me. And I'm looking around for guides, and you find great writers from the past, and you find holy men living in the present, or holy women even. I mean, my local, I haven't worked out what she is, whether she's just a lay preacher or whether she's ordained or what, but she's great. And I'm on a journey of discovery. I mean, there are problems that anyone who engages with scripture um, will will suddenly find problems like the Old Testament. There are scenes in the Old Testament where you think, is this really consistent with the loving God that we're taught about? And God is clearly more complicated than the sort of the cozy figure that's presented to us, I think, by certain branches of the church. Um, so yeah, I'm on a mission of discovery. I'm trying to find out what is the purest, truest form of Christianity. What does Jesus really want for us?
Yeah, I think we're all probably on that journey, aren't we? I think that's one of the joys of theology. I think is I have often say to children in schools, the great joy of theology is that there is no right or wrong answer. It's not like doing maths or physics. It's a great subject to debate and uh, consider. How does going the full 9 yards, as it were, as a Christian, James, changed you or impacted on your life? Has there been noticeable differences that you can kind of point to?
Well, one of the great reliefs is that one. I mean, I'm happily married and have been for many years. One of the things that it relieves you of is the burden of wondering whether you're going to have an affair. Because I'm not. Because it's not. And it's not like I was particularly lusting after every woman I saw. But nevertheless, again, you only have to watch TV, any drama. It's all about drug taking, infidelity, betrayal, and worse. It's like we are being programmed by well, they're called TV programs for a reason. We are being programmed by our culture into a godless way of life, into an anti-Christian way of life. And it's very hard to resist that temptation. You can even read newspapers where you get articles by people saying, my marriage has been so spiced up since I started having an affair. or it's sold to you as a sort of of a viable proposition that you should be thinking about. And when you realize that it's not, I mean, being a Christian is in some ways onerous. It's a lot more onerous than being a kind of a free spirit, you know, a godless free spirit. But it's not as demanding as, say, Islam. I mean, you don't have to, you know, you're not expected to pray 5 times a day, starting at, well, not unless you're a monk. Um, but at the same time, it does lay out certain rules quite clearly about how to behave. I mean, love thy neighbor as thyself. Um, um, you know, love your love. What's the first and second commandments, which we're told are the most important ones? You know.
Yeah, love thy neighbor as thyself. There's no commandment greater than this. You know, these they are the key kind of attributes. I think you're the first first person I've said that who's told me that becoming a Christian means that you won't lust after other people, which is most interesting. What about the aspect, James, of you said you were heavily involved in the media and the media
Yeah.
became a vehicle for, you know, how does that play into where we are now, James? You know, one of the problems that I consider constantly is since Donald Trump has become president
Hmm.
and has done this on a Christian ticket, uh, or his interpretation of Christianity, and in some ways I find that good because I want to see people standing on a Christian ticket, but then the
Yes.
difficulty for me is that I don't like him very much, and so there's a juxtaposition there for me that I struggle with. What would you say
I
about that?
mean, this is a kind of 5 hour podcast rather than a. But essentially, I would say your instincts are right. That you shouldn't trust Donald Trump, but then you shouldn't trust any of the characters, the play actors, who are supposedly elected into these positions. They're all they're all actors. Um, Biden was an actor. You know, it's not just Trump. They all are. Boris Johnson. I mean, look at. Remember Boris Johnson with his, oh, I'm like a character from the Beano, and I've got my tousled hair, and oh, my suit's rumpled, and I'm a real character. They're all like that. Zelensky I mean, Zelensky literally was a comedy actor who, before he became president, played a comedy actor who becomes the Ukraine's president. I mean, how crazy is that? They're all actors. Macron's an actor. Um, Whoever's president of Germany now is an actor. Um, Once you understand that all the world all the world's a stage, as Shakespeare told us, revealing the method. Once you realize that these people are not there to represent us, but to represent the interests of shadowy elites whose names we often don't know. Once you realize that these shadowy elites are in the service of Satan, then you start drilling down to the core of the problem, which is that um, as as it tells us in I think John, that Satan is the god of this world. He, by God's permission, he's been given this domain to. This is the price we pay for free will. We get to choose whether or not we choose God's way, or whether we allow ourselves to be seduced by the temptations of the devil. And you look at the world now, you look at all the kind of the, well, it's not just now, it's since forever. You look at the kind of behavior that gets rewarded in this world. It is things like greed, betrayal, um, profligacy, sexual license. the devil's very good at offering things that we like. Sex and drugs and rock and roll are very good indeed. You know, that is the problem. If sin were not attractive, we'd have no problem resisting it. But because sin coincides with all the things we quite like, that's why it's a challenge. And Donald Trump is part of that deception. And when he talks about Christianity, I mean, I'm always slightly. I tend not to judge other Christians. I think the more Christian than thou game is something I find really irritating among Christians. Sanctimoniousness, I think, is almost the word. It's almost sanctimoniousness to me was almost designed by the devil to put people off Christianity. But nevertheless, where was I? The that is basically the deal. When Donald Trump he uses the language of Christianity, and there are lots of kind of Trumpistas who also are claiming God. But I would be very suspicious of what they're doing. I suspect that their allegiances lie elsewhere. It ain't to the God that you and I and your listeners worship.
Yeah, it's fascinating because as a Christian minister, I worry very much about these kind of things, and what you say about the politicians being actors, I kind of concur with. One thing that I say this as somebody that hasn't supported Keir Starmer. He's very kind of mundane, isn't he? And he is kind of not perhaps if he's if he's an actor, he's not the most entertaining of actors, is he? So does that mean
But
he's
that's his role, you see,
yeah,
Alex. His
yeah.
role is to be bland and slightly dead behind the eyes. No one knows what he really stands for. That in a way, so you can have these larger than life Billy Bunter characters like Boris Johnson, or you can have these slightly mysterious, who is this guy? Like you had with Rishi Sunak, and like you have with Starmer. That is his designated role.
And with that, is that what we need right now in the UK? Do you think, James? Is that the kind of moribundness that we need to accept at the moment?
No, we don't need to. We shouldn't accept any of this. What's happening in the world now is is really the acceleration of something that's been happening um, over millennia, um, which is, well, if you read Revelation, this is what's happening. I I think that we are approaching end times. And although, of course, the scriptures tell us we're never going to know the time. No one's going to tell us. So that's why we've got to be ready for it. But I see what's happening in the world today. I mean, look, for example, have you got children?
I have got children. You've got three adult children.
I mean, if you look at the kind of pop videos that the kids are watching today, they're demonic. I mean, that they are. You see occult rituals being played out on pop videos. You can see the demonic possession in their eyes. I mean, look up Doja Cat, for example. She's literally playing a demon in a pop video. Well, you go back what to the early 1960s, and you've got four lovable mop tops going, "She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah." It was things were so. I mean that was the beginning of the corruption process, but it was much tamer. That they are becoming much more overt and shameless in 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 showing their satanic colours. And I don't know, sound like
James, is that what you think? Do you think that's what they're doing, showing their satanic colours, just to kind of put a curveball in there? As a young guy, I was probably described as a bit of a goth.
yeah,
I
yeah.
went a bit that way, and I sometimes wonder if whether it's something demonic or whether it's actually something just kind of adolescent. That and you could bring into things into this subject matters of um, the whole trans argument at the moment that's going on, and the debates and the rows around uh, trans people, and how it's kind of had an uprising, and there's been more and more people that have come out and said, "Look, I'm trans," and then there's been the kickback saying, "Well,
Hmm.
there's only a man or a woman, there's nothing in between." And I kind of have this kind of dad feeling, never mind a priestly feeling, but a dad thing is that sometimes you just need to give kids the space to work it out for themselves. They're intelligent people, and we should perhaps give them more credit than they deserve. I'm interested to know your response.
I think I think that what is happening and has happened to um, the kids is look. I used to get when I was younger, when I was a groovy rock critic and stuff, hanging out with rock stars. I used to be appalled by all those priggish, prissy, moaning minis who complained about things like bad language on rap records and wanted to slap these labels on offensive albums and didn't like punk and didn't like all this stuff. It just showed how fuddy-duddy and out of touch they were. Um, and what's changed is that I've acquainted myself with the history of of these bands, which are presented to us as we're told, guy picks up a guitar, forms a band in his garage, goes out and becomes famous. And he expresses himself, and we all want to be that person because hey, he's an idol. And he gets all the sex and drugs and what he wants, and isn't that and money, and isn't that cool? And he gets to fly in private jets. When you think about that word idol, what does the Bible say about idols? The Bible it does not think that they're a good thing because they turn our eyes away from God. Now, 15 years ago, I would have been appalled to hear myself saying this stuff because I sound like one of those crazy Christian fundamentalists. But when you realize that the way the music industry works is to manipulate people when they are at their most vulnerable, when they're emerging from childhood and they're still trying to discover their identities as adults, and they're in that transitional period, and that's when they get you. That's when they have these sort of these trends, movements, whatever, like punk, like the New Romantics, like goth, whatever. They are designed to appeal to kids who are trying to express themselves in a different way from their parents. They want to rebel. And here is some ready-made rebellion. Look, kids, here's a movement you can follow. Here's some things you can do which are really going to upset mum and dad. And so what's going on here, if you look at it from the big picture perspective, is that music is designed to break children away from their parents, to steer them to encourage rebellion, to encourage them to reject societal norms, reject even things like doing work, and certainly things like going to church, to make them have more sex, take more drugs. Uh, I used to think all this was great. I mean, really, why not? Isn't that what life's for? But I now think that what this is really about was a war on our civilization, on the family, on Christianity, on the things that actually lead to long-term stability and happiness.
Yeah, fascinating, James. Thanks for your comments. I was just thinking about that what you said about ready-made kind of rebels, and it makes me think about Nigel Farage. Do you think he is the ready-made rebel
Yes,
for our society today? And is that a good thing, or is that a deeply worrying thing?
it's never a good thing. The thing I like to stress, they're all the bloody same. All these people. It doesn't matter whether it's Boris or whether it's Keir. or whether it's the apparent alternative, Nigel. You look at Nigel. His act is basically Mr. Toad, isn't it? Out of Wind in the Willows. What do you know about Nigel Farage? He wears the kind of coat that you'd wear to go to Cheltenham races in. It's a cover coat with the velvet collar. He's always filmed with a pint in his hand, and he likes a fag. What what political influencers, the behind the scenes people who are controlling these actors, what they've realized is that people like these stereotypes. There's a the it's a bit like a sort of TV detective, There's like Inspector Morse had his jag and his pint, or there's Bergerac. He lived on Jersey and did something or other, or whatever. In the same way, politicians have a limited number of characteristics. There's Nigel with his pint and his fag, and you can. He dares say things differently. He's not one of them. Well, he's exactly one of them. He's exactly the same. He's just got a different set of characteristics. So Nigel Farage pretends that he's not Conservative and he's not Labour, but they are all the same. He's just a continuation of the Uniparty.
But if they are all the same, somebody's got to be in power, haven't they? And at the moment, that's Keir. Do you think it's a realistic prospect that Farage could be the next prime minister? There is a definite kind of, um, I'm in Burnley, James, very industrial, working class. That Brexit went to Conservative for the first time in generations and has now gone back to Labour. But I don't
And look how
feel the
you were all
people.
betrayed. All the people. I remember Brexit, and remember this was in the time when I still believed in the political process as a way of changing things. And what struck me was how many ordinary people, not the sort of the posh people, not the chattering classes, but ordinary, the sort of the people who ran the garden centre. I'd find myself in conversations with people about Brexit, and what they clearly felt was that they had been ignored by the political classes. They just all these rules and regulations which they had no control over, and they had a sense that they weren't living in their own country anymore. And this they felt was their last chance to make a difference. It was the vote. They recognised that it didn't matter who you voted for in general elections because you always get the same old thing. But they thought here was the one chance in their life to try and vote for something which might make a material difference to their lives and their country and things they believed in. And what happened? They voted for Brexit. They were told wonderful things would happen. Nothing changed at all. And I don't blame those people for never wanting to vote again, or at least not caring where they put their vote anymore, because it doesn't matter. Um, so you say that, um, are we now to accept that Keir Starmer is in power and that should make a difference? I think my advice to anyone watching your podcast would be to recognize that politics is broken, has been for a very long time, and is broken by design. These people are not there to represent you. They're not there to look after your interests. They're not there to make things better. They are there to enforce the will of the people who run the world. We're talking sort of shadowy trillionaires, um, who are not dependent on borders, not dependent on national sovereignty, who appear at shady events that you barely know of, like the Bilderberg Group and the World Economic Forum and stuff. They're the ones that are calling the shots, and the politicians are their puppets. And the people who are controlling these puppet politicians are basically evil. They see us as cattle. They don't give a toss about the lives of ordinary people. And that's how it's always been. They want to kind of run the world as it was in the time of Pharaoh, or as in the time of the Babylonian courts or the Assyrians. That's what they're looking, or the Roman Empire even, where you had a few families sitting on the Capitoline and Palatine hills, and the plebs were kept in the filth in the city. That's why Christianity became the world's greatest religion, because you could be poor and you could still know that you, unlike the ruling class who don't give a damn about you, you know that God does care about you. And I think that the best I can advise to give to your listeners is to concentrate on God and never mind the politics, because politics is not interested in you.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting stuff in there, and I was thinking about what you said earlier about are we in the end times? I've recently done a couple of assemblies in schools and asked children what we were talking about Shrove Tuesday or Pancake Day to give it its kind of you know, and the kids knew about pancakes, but they didn't know about Shrove Tuesday. Very, a handful of children in a whole school, and that really kind of might not be seen as a hugely significant thing, but to me it was quite poignant and quite telling actually about where we are as a church. But it makes me wonder what you've said about the issues that I completely agree with you about our politicians, but I wonder, think about what you said about the end times. But if is there still an opportunity for the church to speak into this, James? I'm not sure what your denomination is, but I'm a member of the General Synod for the Church of England, and kind of I want to scream at them sometimes, saying that we're talking about the wrong things here. We need to be uh, pointing people in a different direction to what we're kind of just we're digging our own hole here. What's your thoughts about the church and its role if it's still got one?
Uh, it goes back to the point we were discussing near the beginning, which is that there's a reason why Christianity is dying in, not just in this country, but in I mean, there are exceptions, aren't there? Africa, for example. I think Africa congregations are growing, and I think there's a reason for that, which is the reason I'm about to give you, which is that Christianity in the West, particularly, has become separated from the the key element, which is the numinous, that with the supernatural. That it's the one unique thing that it has going for it. There are lots of organisations doing good to the poor, food banks or whatever. But what they can't do, because it's not their job, and it is the job of Christianity, is to remind people that God made us in his image, and that he sent his only son, and that he died for us on the cross. And 3 days later, he was resurrected, and he died for our sins. And as long as you put your faith in Jesus, um, you will be shriven, you will be redeemed. And I think that that is the beginning. And that doesn't mean you need to you turn into a sanctimonious bore. Doesn't mean to say you need to kiss goodbye to your worldly existence, because I think God allows us to live in the world, and after all, he did make this world for us, for our joy and delectation. But that I think is ought to be the role of the church, and it's too often forgetting it. I mean, look, I live in the country, surrounded by. I've got 6 churches within a reasonable walking distance, and I see the dwindling congregations, and it's mostly people my age or older than me, and I try and support these churches by going to the these services, and they're full of good people, and the people who taking the services are good people. But there's a big leap between, well, a huge gap rather, between these real churchgoers and the simple services that they conduct, and the time that they put into it, the voluntary time they give, and the church hierarchy, which is concerned with utter nonsense, like, what is it, reparations for the slave trade, or all these kind of values which have nothing to do with actually what the church is about, which is about making itself available to people who want to worship, and the sense of community you get. I mean, when, for example, my wife was ill, the solace I got from my fellow churchgoers, from when the vicar prayed, you mentioned her name, and that really matters because prayer works. Prayer's not some empty thing that you say, that you're not speaking into a void. God listens, and prayer does change things. Simple things like that, which I think the church is neglecting. I mean, you don't even say the church should have been outraged that at school assemblies you don't there's no Christian element anymore. When I was a child, we sang things like "There is a green hill far away," all things bright and beautiful. That it was part of our. I knew what happened at the wedding at Cana when I was a small child. All this has been lost,
Yeah,
almost.
yeah, it's very sad and deeply frustrating, but I remain faithful. James, this time has absolutely flown by. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Just that we're in this period of Lent, James. Since you kind of went the full distance in your faith, has it become an important season for you? And if so, how?
You want You know what? I find that when you become a proper Christian, it becomes much, much harder doing it right. For example, I noticed that when I was trying to decide what I should give up for Lent, quite a lot of my vices had gone already. So it was quite difficult finding one. And then and then I did all the things that you do where you try and rationalize yourself out of it, like saying, well, do I really need to give up anything else? Because anyway, isn't this more of a kind of Catholic tradition? And where did this come from? And then there's another voice in my head saying, 40 days and 40 nights thou wast fasting in the world. And I'm thinking, well, look, Jesus was fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, and you're just worried about. Anyway, yes, I think most cultural Christians think that Christmas is the most important thing in because it's the time they go to church and they could sing all the jolly hymns. But of course, the run up to Easter is the really important part. It's Christ's, the sufferings and leading to his. I mean, the when you read the scriptures, as I do every day, and as Christ gets closer towards Jerusalem, and you can see because he's incarnate. He's going through all these human. He knows he's going to die horribly, and he's like, I know I've got to do this, Father, but if it's your will, but when he goes off, do you remember that scene where he goes off to pray, and the other disciples fall asleep? And I think about these things a lot.
Yeah, well, I do too, and I've tried to encourage my congregation not just to arrive at Easter, because you miss so much. There's so much opportunity to pray and to learn and to read and understand. And if you just it's like turning up for the penalties at the World
It
Cup
is.
final.
It
And
is.
so that would be my encouragement. But it's not about me, this podcast. It's about other people. But James, I've really enjoyed having you on. I hope it's been okay for you. And
I've enjoyed it very much.
good. And if people are interested, do check out the Godcast. There's hundreds of interviews with politicians, with rock stars, with sports people, and with some wonderful
Oh,
theologians.
Alex, can I put in a plug for? I do two podcasts. One of which deals with which is called the Delingpod, Delingpod, which is you can find everywhere, and that's where I have interesting conversations. I suppose largely in the area of what you might call conspiracy theories. And then I also do a separate series, also under the Delingpod handle, called Welcome to the Psalms, because one of my hobbies is learning the Psalms, and so I take a different psalm every now and again and talk about it. So people might like that.
Yeah, the Psalms are fascinating. Remind me, I don't know if you're familiar with an author called Gordon Wenham, who has written beautifully about the Psalms, and yeah, I think they kind of get. in the weekly notice sheets, the Psalms are there, but we don't read them. We read the Old Testament, the Epistle, and the Gospel, and the Psalm kind of gets a bad press. But we're missing a trick, I think.
What's your favorite psalm?
It would be Psalm 23 because I use it a lot, because it comes up a lot in funerals, and I've been fortunate to go to the Holy Land and went to the site where you can see the valley, and it just transports you, and
Well, you see, you've seen the Valley of the Shadow of Death itself.
the itself, and it was very moving, and to be with friends. Yeah, I don't. Have you been to the Holy Land, James?
I haven't, no. I was thinking that they call Psalm 23 the Martyr's Psalm, and I think one reason it's so short that you've got time to say it before you get fed to the lions.
Well, I'll bear that in mind. Well,
Yeah.
go check out James's podcast. I'm sure it's far more successful than mine. I've got my book. I'm going to plug my book, Our Daily Bread from August to the Altar, published by Harper North, which is out, tells my story. And James, thanks for coming on the Godcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.